What family secret was finally spilled in your family?
Found out my uncle is actually my brother. My mom had him when she was so young that my grandparents raised him.
My sister cheated on her husband throughout her entire marriage to the point that all 3 of her kids have different biological fathers.
When my mother fell ill and I took over her finances, I found thousands of pounds of gambling debt on her credit cards. Then I found adoption papers for a child she'd had before me that she'd never mentioned. Then another family member told me my dad didn't die in a car crash but committed suicide in prison.
My grandma didn't drive. I thought she couldn't, but it was just never discussed. One day when I was maybe 7 to 8, I'd been trying to get anyone to drive me to the store for candy. We were visiting my aunt and uncle. Grandma lived with them. They had bit-o honey at the local store, which I could no longer get at home. But no one would take me to the store. Finally I said I'd just ask Grandma, and my cousin chimes in with, "Grandma can't drive." "Oh, you bet your sweet ass I can drive. They just don't let me." Grandma had overheard and she was in high dudgeon. But that's all that was said about it, and my aunt finally took me to the store, so I forgot about it. Years later, when I'd just gotten my license, I asked my mom what was up with Grandma not driving. She explained that during Prohibition Grandma bootlegged alcohol for moonshiners. She was very successful at it. She was so successful at it that when the moonshiners were finally busted, even though the revenue has never caught my grandma, her license was suspended by the state, to never be reissued. Later in life she was told she could petition for it back, but it came with an admission of guilt or some such. She told him to go to hell.
My great-great-grandfather was exiled and banned from Missouri for being a sheep thief.
As a young teenager, my grandma shot her pedophile father in the back while he was sleeping. He had been molesting her and all her siblings. She ran away after being hidden by her brother for some time. Her father survived though. Thankfully my grandma never faced any legal consequences, but she was beep crazy until the day she died. My aunt told me at her funeral because I asked why grandma was the way she was.
After my grandfather passed, we found out he had fathered a child when he was posted in Italy during World War II. He never knew. His mother intercepted any letters from the Italian girl. He came home, met and married my grandmother and had 4 children. I forget who in the family found out and how. It's crazy to think we have a whole Italian family out there. Edit, went to sleep and woke up to crazy notifications. Thanks for the awards. To clarify, I'm in the UK, not that it's relevant to the story. My oldest aunt is 77, so this kid would be at least 79 by now, I would think. We've considered doing the DNA testing, but some family members aren't comfortable with how those companies could use the information. It's a really sad story, but if his mother hadn't intercepted the letters, I wouldn't exist. It's a weird place to be in emotionally.
My aunt wasn't my grandfather's child. He met my granny when my aunt was a very sick infant. She had polio and wasn't expected to survive. My granddad married my granny so she could get on his insurance and move to an area that had proper medical support. My aunt was the first infant to survive open heart surgery at Yale New Haven Hospital, and although she had to be in leg braces most of her childhood, she had a great, although not long enough, life. My granddad loved her like she was his own, and I never knew until she went to her bio dad's funeral when I was a teenager. Editing to say, thank you to everyone who's shared their family stories or left a comment. I've spent the whole evening reminiscing and sharing stories I haven't really told in a long time, and that really means a lot. Thank you so much to everyone who's given an award, or left an upvote. I haven't been able to comment on everyone's stories, but I've read them all and deeply appreciate them. This has been the highlight of my week.
My grandmother recently died. She was famous in our town for her amazing cooking, catering, in particular her turkey dinners. Notably, her gravy was absolutely amazing. So delicious. She had a heart attack several years ago and her near-death experience convinced her to share some of her secret recipes with me, all except for her gravy recipe. When she died this spring, I was going through her pantry and found an entire bucket of KFC gravy mix. She was literally using KFC gravy mix as a base to make her incredible gravy. Huge scandal. LMAO edit. Used infamous when I meant famous smiley face.
I started having problems with my teeth. Spontaneous abscess that resulted in multiple root canals. My dentist did some looking into what the cause might be and found some really odd abnormalities with my incisors, roots and nerves. the teeth that had been afflicting me, so he sent out requests for help to a couple of professors he knew in the field. When my next appointment came up, he was really quiet for a bit before verbally stumbling about. It turns out that what was happening with my teeth was a classic sign of inbreeding, and he was super uncomfortable giving me the news. I brought it up to my mom and she just was like, "Oh well, yeah, didn't you know? WTF?" Of course I didn't know. Turns out that not very far back in the family tree, several of my relatives decided that it was a good idea to get married to one another, and no one bothered to mention it, ever. The small town where I live is 85% my relatives, no joke. I hadn't even met all of them, that's how many there are. Edited for clarification. I had made a big point of going far away from my hometown to meet my husband, married 12 years this June, because I was afraid of having children with someone that might be my cousin. Only to find out 5 years after we had been married that I was in fact a product of inbreeding. My husband and I are not related at all. And #X200B. Edit. I did not expect this to blow up. I honestly thought that it would just get lost. Thank you for the awards. I will try to answer some questions here. My teeth look normal. Nothing special about them, no crowding, nicely spaced. Pretty normal teeth. I didn't take what the dentist said really all that seriously and figured that what the prof said was maybe just a theory rather than fact. Maybe just correlation rather than causation. Then I told my mom. All of my lower incisors have split roots with split nerves. The nerves are in a V shape instead of just straight. There are cavities in my chin around the nerves, so if I get a slight bump on the chin, the inflammation can cause an infection. I pretty much end up looking like a sexy female version of Brian Mulroney. I found out about this after I had been married for around 5 years. I am from Ontario, Canada. I won't say where because you might be my cousin. Both my mother's side and my father's side came from small towns where the population was predominantly family. I.e., the families had lived there since the town had been settled. So there is a good chance that there had been some inter-cousin shenanigans on both sides, though no names from my mother's side showed up in my father's family tree. So far 23 Anne says that I have a little over 1,500 relatives scattered across Canada and the USA and only 17 in the UK. Mostly my father's side is in the USA, which surprised me, while my mother's side is mostly in Canada. But that's only people that have taken the test, there still could be more.
That my grandfather was an atomic soldier. Instead of sending him to fight in the Korean War, they sent him to Nevada, where, after having him turn away from the initial flash, he witnessed the mushroom cloud. After that was over, he was ordered to march to the detonation point, where he was unwittingly exposed to high amounts of radiation. Luckily for my family, my grandpa is now in his 90s, even after a few cancer scares, and the rest of us, my mom, aunt, cousins, sister, and I, are cancer-free and fairly healthy, but this is medical information that we really should have known earlier.
Grandpa was a serious Nazi German war criminal.
My dad fathered a child in high school. His side of the family knew, and my mom. We found out years after he died that we have a half-sister.
Due to 23andMe, my dad learned that his recently deceased father was not his biological father. It wasn't a situation related to my grandma cheating either, it was a sperm donation. So, they knew this was the case his entire life. Pretty crazy they never told him. His parents did not pass until he was approximately 65 years old. Talk about a curveball.
After I was molested by my uncle, it came out he had done this to another one of my sisters and my family covered it up, particularly my mother. Now I know why my sister didn't like how close my uncle got to me when I was younger.
My mother had a child when she was a teenager, and she had given him up for adoption to a family. After this, she went to college, got her degree, married my father, and gave birth to my 4 siblings and myself. Approximately 30 years after giving her child up for adoption, I remember her getting a phone call and immediately locking herself in her room. I was about 12 at the time. I remember feeling scared because I could hear my mom crying, but she didn't want to see anybody or talk about why she was crying. On an evening later that week, my parents sat each of us kids down and told us about my mom's past and explained that my half-brother had reached out to my mom wanting to meet her and get to know her. My dad had known ever since he and mom were dating in college, and I believe my oldest sister had been told previous to this point. But the rest of my siblings and myself and all of the in-laws on my dad's side, my grandma, aunts, and uncles etc., didn't know about this part of her past. We are fairly religious, conservative, so it was really shocking at first. My mom then flew out to the state where my half-brother lived with her sisters and met him. Both my mom and my half-brother were both very nervous about the whole thing, but by the end of their trip meeting each other, they got to rebuild a relationship. After a bit of time, we, my siblings and I, got to meet him too. Fast forwarding to now, he's since moved to our same state and we see him much more frequently. He's in all of our family pictures, we see him occasionally for holidays and birthdays, and we all see him as part of our family. We're a very close-knit and extroverted family, while he is much shyer, so at times he can be a bit more distant than we would like, but we give him his space. I know my mom stays in close touch with him, and we love it when he's able to make it for family dinners and whatnot. Back then, I was the youngest and, up till then, the only boy in my family, so I loved learning that I had an older brother. Now that I'm an adult, I sometimes get his old clothes because we're roughly the same size. He's got good taste too, so I really lucked out, haha. I love that this family secret was spilled and that we were able to welcome my brother into our family and have him in our lives.
After my mom died, I found out the real story behind my parents' marriage. She came to my father's country to visit some of her relatives. Met my father, and after just 1 week she asked him to marry her so she could stay in the country. My father accepted because he had no one else and his parents were pressing him to get married already. But the highlight of the story is that over some time, the two of them fell in love with each other. Their love only grew over the time and they were really happy together. My mother spent her last days very ill, and she would accept only my father by her bedside. He swears to this day that she was an angel sent from God to take care of him. I am shocked that they got married just like that, out of the blue, and ended up loving each other so deeply. I can only hope to have as good and loving marriage as they had. Edit, I had no idea my parents' little secret would touch so many people. Thank you all, it means a lot.
My great-grandma was Cherokee. Until I took a DNA test and have no Cherokee. A lot of the older relatives are mad about that one, lol.
When my sister was diagnosed with cancer and her survival chances were low, it inevitably came out that she wasn't my sister. Parents must have felt we should all know the truth just in case. She survived her treatment, and will always be my sister. Edit, whoa. Thanks for the kind words, everyone.
We went to my grandmother's for Christmas dinner like we did every year, and my uncle drank too much, and kind of hinted that he had an affair with my mother. A couple of months and 2 DNA tests later we found out my sister is actually his daughter. My dad never spoke to his brother again. And of course, my parents got divorced. And I needed a lot of therapy. And chocolate. Gosh, we are trash.
My mom and brother are not biologically related to me. My bio mom died sometime after I was born, leaving me, my sister, and my dad behind. My brother was the one that told me. My parents never told me because they wanted to protect me from the truth, but my brother thought that was a BS reason for me to not know. I don't know if my parents know that I know the truth, but I don't want to bring it up either.
My great-aunt had a secret kid that she adopted out, before she got married. Told everybody a couple years ago while she was working on finding him. He's a great part of the family now. Edit. Not to be that guy, but I've never had a comment blow up so much, so I'm going to be that guy. I'm happy my little family secret has reverberated with so many people, and even if I haven't directly replied, I've read every story. Treat your newly found family right when you find them, they're usually awesome.
My uncles are infamous criminals who killed multiple people. I thought they bred dogs. Edit. Thanks for the awards. The only good thing that ever came from this.
We found out after my grandfather died that none of his 7 children with my grandmother were his, and that they all likely had different fathers.
Found out my grandma had a baby as a teenager and was forced to give him up for adoption by my great-grandparents. 40 years later he found us.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more quality content every day.